June 6, 1945. Before dawn broke over Hiroshima, Dr. Kiyoshi Tanaka woke to the sound of cicadas thrumming in the humid summer air. His hand hesitated on the futon, a simple human hesitation in a world that still felt orderly, predictable, familiar. Outside, the sky was already pale with promise. In 3 months, the war that had cast its long shadow across Asia and the Pacific would be over. In 2 hours, Dr. Tanaka would witness something no human could unsee. He slipped quietly from the small room he rented near the hospital, a modest home with sliding shoji screens and a garden where a single cherry tree trembled in the morning breeze. Hiroshima was a city of river bridges and laughter echoing over stone, a city whose hearts still beat with the ordinary rhythms of life. Children shouted as they chased each other down the streets. Street vendors called out the morning's offerings: rice balls, grilled fish, steaming bowls of miso. Dr. Tanaka felt the tug of normalcy in every breath, in every step along the cracked pavement. The war had been far away from Hiroshima. There had been air raid drills. There had been ration lines. There had been talk, always talk, of battles and losses on distant islands. But here, life continued. His patients were ordinary people with ordinary ailments, fevers, broken bones, wounds from farming accidents, heart trouble, tuberculosis. He dressed each wound with meticulous care, offered gentle words behind his surgical mask, measured pulses and breathed with each human spirit he encountered. At the hospital, nurses greeted him with morning bows and tired smiles. The emergency rooms were full, as always, one more thing that made Tanaka feel useful, needed, anchored. He tended to an elderly man with a fever, a young mother with a sprained ankle, a factory worker struggling to breathe through a lingering cough. He moved from bed to bed as though moving between the rooms of a house, routine, familiar, resolute. And yet there was a strange quietness beneath the surface of that morning. Not silence, no, the cicadas still sang. But a quiet like the breath held just before something began, or ended. Tanaka felt it at the edge of his thoughts, like an uninvited chill on a warm day. Outside, the sun climbed imperceptibly. The sky turned from the muted gray of first light to the pale blue that promised heat. Birds began their morning calls. A train whistle cried in the distance. And Dr. Tanaka, walking between wards like a man in a dream, carried in his pocket a folded newspaper clipping, a letter from his wife, written weeks ago, urging him to be careful, to return home soon. He smiled at the thought of her, bright eyes, gentle voice, feet tucked beneath a cotton kimono. The war had taken so much from so many, but it had not taken this, their belief that tomorrow would come. The belief that humanity had not yet seen its darkest hour. At 8:15, that belief would be shattered. At 8:15, the world ended without warning. Dr. Tanaka was standing near a window on the second floor of the hospital, reading a patient's chart and arguing gently with a young nurse about dosages, when the light arrived. It was not sunlight. It was not lightning. It was not anything his brain could recognize or compare to memory. It was simply white. A white so absolute that it erased all shadows, all colors, all shapes. For a fraction of a second, Hiroshima ceased to exist and became only light. Tanaka did not hear the explosion. He did not feel the heat. He only felt himself being lifted, as if the hospital itself had suddenly become weightless, and then the world slammed back into him. The window did not break. The window disappeared. The wall behind him did not crack. It ceased to be. The ceiling folded downward like paper. Something struck his head. Or perhaps the floor struck his face. He could never remember which. Then came the sound. Not a bang. Not a roar. A sound like the sky tearing itself apart. A sound so vast that it did not seem to come from any direction. It came from everywhere at once, and from inside his own skull. The building screamed. The world screamed. Then there was nothing. No light. No sound. No pain. Only darkness. For a moment, or for an eternity, Dr. Tanaka did not exist. When awareness returned, it did not come gently. It came as suffocation. Dust filled his mouth, his nose, his lungs. His chest refused to expand. Something heavy pinned his legs. His ears rang with a high, endless whistle, like metal screaming far away. He tried to move. Pain answered. A sharp, blinding pain behind his eyes. A deep, crushing pain in his chest. A distant, unreal pain in his left arm that did not seem to belong to him anymore. He tried to speak. No sound came out. He did not know if he was blind or if the world had simply gone dark. He did not know if he was alive or if this was what death felt like. Slowly, painfully, the darkness began to thin. Shapes emerged. Or rather, fragments of shapes. Broken beams. Collapsed walls. A ceiling where a floor should have been. The hospital was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The corridor where he had walked minutes before no longer existed. The ward full of patients had been flattened into an unrecognizable mass of wood, stone, and bodies. Bodies. He realized then that he was lying among them. Some were not moving. Some were moving, but not in ways that made sense. Some were making sounds that did not sound human. He pushed against the weight on his legs and felt something shift. A beam rolled slightly. Dust fell like gray snow. Light, real light now, filtered through the ruins. And in that light, Dr. Tanaka saw something that broke the last structure of his mind. The city was not on fire. The city was gone. Where Hiroshima had been, there was only a boiling, rising wall of smoke and dust, climbing into the sky like a second sun in reverse. He did not know it yet. But at that moment, he had seen the first seconds of a new age. And humanity had just stepped into it. Dr. Tanaka did not remember how he got out of the ruins. He only remembered that at some point he was no longer under the hospital. He was under the sky. The sky was the wrong color. It was not blue. It was not gray. It was something like dirty copper, boiling and moving, as if the atmosphere itself had been wounded. The air smelled like burned metal and wet ashes. Every breath hurt. Every breath tasted like something that should not be inside a human body. He stood up. Or tried to. The world tilted violently, and he had to lean against what used to be a wall. His left arm hung strangely, numb and heavy, like it belonged to someone else. He looked down at himself and realized, with distant clinical calm, that his white coat was gone. Or perhaps it had been burned away. His shirt was in strips. His skin was covered in fine gray dust and dark blood that he did not yet recognize as his own. Then he saw the street. Or what used to be the street. It was no longer a place. It was a surface. Flat. Open. Empty. Buildings were not damaged. They were erased. Only their shadows remained, dark shapes burned into walls and stones where they had once stood. A man-shaped shadow. A ladder-shaped shadow. The outline of a cart. Ghosts printed onto the world. He took a step forward. And then he saw them. They were coming toward him. Slowly. Silently. At first, he thought they were covered in cloth. Then he realized the cloth was their skin. It hung from their arms and faces in long, loose strips, swaying as they walked. Some held their hands out in front of them, not like they were reaching, but like they were afraid to touch the air. Some had no hair. Some had no faces. Some had eyes that were open, but not seeing. They did not scream. They did not cry. They only walked. One woman passed him, barefoot, her kimono burned into a black pattern across her body. The skin on her back was gone. She did not seem to notice. A child followed her, holding something dark in his hands. Only when he came closer did Tanaka realize the child was carrying part of his own scalp. Tanaka's medical mind tried to take control. Shock. Severe burns. Mass trauma. But the words meant nothing here. This was not medicine. This was something else. He looked at their faces and understood the most terrifying thing. They were not running from danger. They were walking away from it. As if whatever had happened behind them was so absolute that even fear had been burned out of their nervous systems. Some collapsed while walking. They did not try to stand again. Others walked into walls and stopped, still standing. Some simply sat down and never moved again. The city made no sound except fire. No birds. No engines. No voices. Just the distant crackling of things still burning. Tanaka realized then that he had not seen a single intact human being. Not one. And he understood, with a cold certainty, that Hiroshima was no longer a city. It was a wound. And it was still open. As the morning sun rose over Hiroshima, the city was unrecognizable. Streets that had once bustled with life now lay in a chaotic tangle of rubble and fire. The blast had reduced entire neighborhoods to smoldering ashes, and the air was thick with smoke and dust that made breathing a struggle. Dr. Takahashi moved through the ruins, his footsteps crunching on shards of glass and splintered wood. Every turn revealed more horror. Buildings split in half, ceilings collapsed onto furniture, walls charred black with the heat of the flash, and the twisted metal frames of vehicles melted like wax. The ground itself was scarred by the force of the explosion, with deep grooves where concrete had been torn from foundations. He had never imagined that human engineering could be obliterated in such a way, leaving behind a city that looked more like a battlefield from centuries past than a modern urban center. The fire spread with terrifying speed. Wooden homes and shops, once the backbone of civilian life, became fuel for an unrelenting inferno. People who had survived the initial blast ran blindly into the streets, many engulfed by flames before they could even comprehend the scale of destruction. Some were trapped under collapsed roofs, calling out for help that would never come. The roar of fire mixed with the shrill cries of the injured and dying, creating a soundscape that Dr. Takahashi would never forget. In a single glance, he could see the fragility of life made painfully clear. A single wall, a single beam, a single misstep, and a person could vanish into the flames. Bodies littered the streets. Some were burned beyond recognition, their clothing fused to charred skin, others still moving, moaning, unable to escape the agony. The doctor's trained mind registered injuries he had studied in medical school, but the scale of devastation rendered clinical detachment impossible. People's eyes were wide with shock, their mouths open in silent screams, hands clutching at wounds that could not be bandaged. Some ran into the river in desperation, only to find the water scalding from the heat radiating off the shattered city. Dr. Takahashi tried to organize survivors, guiding the uninjured to help the wounded, but the sheer number of casualties overwhelmed every effort. He had never seen the human body subjected to such violence, and yet, he was compelled to move forward, to tend to those he could save, even as the inferno threatened to consume him as well. The psychological shock was as lethal as the flames. Survivors wandered aimlessly, in a state of disbelief, their minds unable to process the sudden destruction of everything they had known. Some stood silently staring at empty streets, homes and businesses turned to ash, grappling with the impossibility of their new reality. Children clung to the corpses of parents or ran screaming into the chaos, their small voices drowned by the crackling of fire and falling debris. Dr. Takahashi's colleagues were either dead or scattered, leaving him to bear witness to scenes that were almost mythic in their horror. Each step he took through the city felt like trespassing in a world abandoned by reason, as if the natural laws themselves had been rewritten in the span of a single, incomprehensible moment. Amidst the devastation, small acts of resilience appeared. Neighbors helped carry the wounded to open areas free of falling debris, passing water and bandages where they could. Even the gravest injuries were met with astonishing courage, mothers shielding children, elders directing the uninjured to safer spots, young men pulling friends from burning buildings. These fleeting moments of human determination contrasted starkly with the overwhelming scale of destruction, highlighting both the vulnerability and the perseverance of life. Dr. Takahashi moved from scene to scene, documenting injuries, treating burns where he could, and noting the patterns of destruction in his notebook. His observations would later inform both medical understanding of atomic injuries and the harrowing stories that survivors would carry for the rest of their lives. The inferno was relentless. Even hours after the initial explosion, firestorms flared unpredictably, fed by piles of timber, collapsed buildings, and the chemical reactions ignited by the bomb's heat. The wind carried embers into new areas, sparking fresh blazes that threatened any pockets of survivors. Dr. Takahashi was forced to make agonizing choices: who could be saved and who could not. Each decision weighed heavily on him, as he realized that no medical skill could compensate for the sheer magnitude of destruction. The air itself seemed alive with suffering, thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid scent of burning flesh. In that moment, the doctor understood the full power of the weapon that had reduced Hiroshima to this state, a force capable of annihilating not just buildings, but entire communities, and leaving psychological scars that would endure long after the fires burned out. By the afternoon, the city resembled a hellscape frozen in time. Roads were impassable, buildings were unrecognizable, and the wounded were scattered in every direction. Dr. Takahashi paused to look back at the skyline he had known, now a jagged silhouette of ruined structures and black smoke. Even for someone trained in medicine and disaster response, the magnitude of loss was incomprehensible. The human body and spirit were being tested beyond any previous limit. In a single day, entire families had been obliterated, communities erased, and the very sense of normal life destroyed. Yet, amidst the chaos, the instinct to survive, to help, to bear witness, remained unbroken. Nightfall brought a temporary reprieve, but the fires continued to burn across the city, illuminating the devastation in an eerie, flickering glow. Survivors huddled in open spaces, trying to keep warm, tending to wounds as best they could. Dr. Takahashi moved among them, exhausted but resolute, knowing that the following days would bring new waves of suffering, radiation sickness, infections, and the psychological toll of witnessing so much death. Yet even in this darkness, small acts of humanity persisted, sharing water, comforting a child, carrying the injured. These acts, brief and fragile as they were, would later be remembered as testaments to human endurance in the face of unimaginable horror. As Dr. Ito moved through the streets, one image burned itself into his mind more than any other: the children. They wandered in shock, small bodies scarred, some limping, others with clothes torn and burned. Eyes wide, uncomprehending, some screamed without words, some sat silently amidst the rubble, staring at a sky they could no longer recognize. The innocence of childhood had been obliterated, replaced with a fear that was alien and profound. One boy, no older than 7, clutched a charred doll to his chest. Its face was melted, its limbs twisted, yet the boy held it as if it were the only thing left of a normal world. Dr. Ito knelt beside him, trying to offer water. The boy's lips moved silently, repeating the name of a mother he would never see again. Around them, the city moaned, a chorus of despair echoing through the skeletal streets. Families had been torn apart in an instant. Dr. Ito witnessed children searching desperately for parents, calling names into the smoke-filled air, their cries piercing the grim silence between burning buildings. Many children were alone, left to fend for themselves, their small hands blackened with ashen blood. The doctor tried to gather them into safe zones, but there were too many, and nowhere truly safe to take them. The medical realities for these children were horrifying. Burns that adults might endure were often fatal for young bodies. Limbs blistered and blackened, skin sloughing away in sheets. Radiation exposure added invisible injuries, bleeding gums, sudden fevers, hair falling out in clumps. Dr. Ito had never seen such vulnerability, and yet he had no choice but to act. Each child he touched became both a patient and a symbol of the fragility of life in this new atomic age. He found a small group of children huddled beneath the ruins of what had been a school. Among them was a girl no older than 10, her face half covered in soot, half exposed to raw burns. She held a younger brother close, rocking him silently. Dr. Ito reached out to help, but the boy flinched, eyes wide with terror, as if any human touch might burn as well. Slowly, through patience and gentleness, he began to guide them toward the temporary station. Each step was perilous, falling debris, smoldering ash, and hidden fires made every meter a challenge. Amidst this chaos, the doctor noticed the resilience of children. Even with limbs burned, clothes torn, and spirits nearly broken, some helped one another. A boy guided a blind girl across a street filled with rubble. Another offered water from a tank into a small group too weak to hold their own cups. These acts of quiet heroism stood in stark contrast to the overwhelming horror surrounding them. In that moment, Dr. Ito saw a glimmer of hope, a stubborn ember of humanity refusing to be extinguished. Yet the emotional toll was relentless. The cries of the children, the blank stares of those too shocked to scream, haunted Dr. Ito. One by one, he watched as some succumbed to injuries before any treatment could reach them. Their deaths were not violent but slow, a combination of burns, dehydration, and shock. Each loss carved a scar into the doctor's heart, a reminder that even the strongest human will could not always prevail. By mid-afternoon, makeshift shelters were overflowing with children. Volunteers, other doctors, nurses, and civilians tried to organize the wounded, but the numbers were staggering. Dr. Ito found himself performing procedures that would normally require hours, now compressed into frantic minutes, moving from one child to another, bandaging, comforting, and documenting. His notebook filled with names, ages, and the details of injuries, a ledger of tragedy that he could not forget. As night approached, the streets became eerily quiet. Fires continued to burn in isolated pockets, casting flickering shadows over the children who had survived the day. Dr. Ito sat among them, exhausted, watching as some drifted into sleep despite the chaos. He whispered softly, promises he could not keep, "You will live, you will survive," but he knew that many would not. The city had been broken, and these children carried the weight of Hiroshima's destruction in their small bodies and fragile spirits. In the silence of the night, Dr. Ito realized the scale of what had occurred. The bomb had not only destroyed the city but had ripped childhood itself from the lives of thousands. The children of Hiroshima would grow up in a world where memories of fire and ash would never fade. And yet, even in the darkest corners of this devastation, there remained sparks of resilience, small acts of courage, clinging to hope against all odds. By the third day after the bombing, Dr. Ito and his colleagues had become shadows of themselves, moving mechanically through a city of fire and ash. Hospitals were gone, clinics reduced to rubble, and the few remaining buildings offered no protection from the heat, smoke, or contamination. Supplies were almost non-existent, bandages torn from old sheets, alcohol for sterilization in short supply, medicine rationed to a single tablet per patient. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the doctors pressed on. The first patients he saw that morning were a mix of the living and the nearly dead. Burns so deep that skin had fused with clothing, eyes swollen shut, limbs blackened and brittle. Children clutched their mothers' arms, mothers clutched air, their loved ones already gone. Dr. Ito moved from one body to the next, trying to triage, to decide who could be saved and who could not. Each choice weighed heavily on his conscience. Every moment spent on one patient could mean another's death. The medical teams improvised with ingenuity born of desperation. Dr. Ito used pieces of metal from destroyed buildings to fashion surgical tools. Charwood became splints. Water from broken pipes was boiled over small fires to sterilize wounds, and yet every day brought new horrors, patients suffering from radiation sickness, with fever and internal bleeding, or inexplicable lesions appearing hours after treatment. In one room of a temporary shelter, Dr. Ito found a mother holding her baby. The infant's skin was blistered, its cries weak and irregular. The mother refused to let go, whispering apologies, tears burning tracks down her soot-covered cheeks. Dr. Ito gently lifted the child and wrapped it in a salvaged blanket. Every small movement was a battle against despair, a fight to instill hope where there was almost none. He administered pain relief where he could, whispered encouragements, and guided parents to accept that sometimes, the best they could do was comfort. By mid-afternoon, fatigue had become a physical presence. Dr. Ito's hands shook, his vision blurred, but he could not stop. The wounded kept arriving, some crawling, some carried by strangers, all needing immediate attention. The streets outside still burned, and the air reeked of smoke and decay. Fires ignited spontaneously in piles of debris, and every doctor, nurse, and volunteer worked with a constant awareness that the next explosion or collapse could take them too. Teamwork became the only defense against despair. Young medical students, themselves just teenagers, followed Dr. Ito's instructions with precision, learning to tie burns, stabilize fractures, and calm terrified patients. Nurses scavenged for clean cloth, water, and even scraps of food. Volunteers transported patients through rubble-strewn streets. Every life saved became a small victory, a temporary triumph in a city that had lost almost everything. The psychological toll was immense. Dr. Ito later recalled the nights when he could hear the cries of the dying even as he tried to rest. Sleep was brief and filled with nightmares, visions of children engulfed in fire, mothers holding nothing but ashes, and the city itself collapsing like a paper model. Yet, each morning, he returned to the streets. Every patient who lived another day reinforced the fragile hope that survival was possible, even amidst incomprehensible destruction. Some days, miracles occurred. A young girl with severe burns on her face survived despite medical impossibility, clinging to life as if sheer will alone could defy physics. Dr. Ito would later mark her name in his notebook with a star, a symbol of resilience, a testament that human determination could resist even the most absolute devastation. These moments, however small, became beacons of courage for both doctors and survivors alike. By the fifth day, makeshift hospitals had begun to form in schools, temples, and open courtyards. Dr. Ito coordinated triage lines, surgical stations, and recovery areas, improvising a system that was both chaotic and effective. They could not save everyone, but they saved enough to give the city a thread of continuity, a promise that life might continue beyond the ashes. The doctor's struggle revealed another truth. The atomic bomb had destroyed infrastructure, homes, and lives, but it had not destroyed the human spirit. Even in the face of impossible odds, Dr. Ito and his colleagues demonstrated courage, compassion, and ingenuity. Their work became the backbone of survival for Hiroshima's children and adults alike, a testament to human perseverance when faced with annihilation. As night fell over the city, Dr. Ito sat on the steps of a ruined building, his hands blackened from hours of labor. Around him, the wounded slept fitfully on the ground. The city was quiet now, but only temporarily. Fires still burned, and the full extent of radiation's silent destruction remained unknown. And yet, amidst this uncertainty, he felt the pulse of life in the fragile, battered survivors around him. Each heartbeat was a victory, each breath a rebellion against the destruction that had sought to erase them. By the end of the first week, Dr. Ito realized that the worst dangers were no longer visible. The city was a field of ash and charred concrete, but a silent enemy lurked in the air, in the soil, and in the bodies of those he treated. Radiation, the invisible poison released by the bomb, was taking its toll. Survivors who had seemed unscathed a day earlier began showing symptoms that defied explanation: fever, nausea, hair loss, and bleeding from the gums. These were not injuries from fire or debris, they were invisible wounds, slowly consuming life from within. Dr. Ito walked among his patients with a new fear in his chest. He had treated burns and fractures before, but this was unprecedented. He tried to isolate symptoms, to track the progression, but knowledge was limited, and each patient was a mystery. He watched a young man, previously strong and alert, become pale and weak within hours, his energy sapped by forces no eye could see. The doctors had no medicine, no antidote, and no clear protocol. They improvised treatments, giving supportive care, nourishing what life remained, and praying that some would survive the invisible fire inside them. Children were the hardest to watch. Their fragile bodies reacted quickly to radiation, and some who had been carried to safety now grew listless and lethargic. Parents, already devastated by loss, often blamed themselves, their despair mingling with the doctor's own helplessness. Dr. Ito would spend long hours by their side, holding their hands, speaking softly, offering comfort even when no solution existed. Each story was a lesson in fragility, and each survival, a miracle. As the days passed, the city's true horror became clearer. Survivors who had left the epicenter began showing delayed symptoms, sores that would not heal, chronic fatigue, and infections that flared without warning. Dr. Ito kept meticulous notes, documenting the patterns, trying to make sense of the invisible enemy. He realized that the atomic bomb's damage could not be measured by bodies alone. Hiroshima was bleeding from within, and he was powerless to stop it completely. The psychological trauma was equally severe. People wandered the streets in shock, their eyes hollow, speaking in whispers of lost family members, destroyed homes, and the sudden disappearance of an entire community. Survivors were haunted by visions of friends and neighbors burned beyond recognition. Some could not eat, others could not sleep. Dr. Ito began to understand that even those who escaped the immediate effects of the blast carried invisible scars that might never heal. Medical teams improvised again, creating makeshift wards for those who could not be moved. In one corner, a group of women tended to elderly patients who had lost their families, offering water and soft blankets, their own exhaustion evident. In another, young boys, survivors themselves, helped move the sick, learning the language of pain and care before they had fully understood childhood. Dr. Ito coordinated these efforts, teaching anyone who could hold a hand, clean a wound, or offer a moment of reassurance. Survival became a community effort. Radiation sickness brought confusion and fear. Patients experienced sudden drops in temperature, severe diarrhea, and bleeding from minor scratches. Dr. Ito and his colleagues experimented with nutrition and hydration, trying to rebuild strengthened bodies that seemed to betray themselves. Each life saved was a small victory, each death, a reminder of the bomb's merciless reach. Even as the city began to stabilize physically, Dr. Ito felt a creeping sense of despair. Corpses buried in rubble, fires that still smoldered beneath the surface, and the unknown future of survivors created a tension that was nearly unbearable. Families waited for news of missing relatives, clinging to hope in a city where hope was scarce. Dr. Ito often held a child in his arms, feeling the fragility of life and the weight of a responsibility he could not escape. By the second week, patterns began to emerge. Those closer to ground zero suffered the most, while those at the periphery showed delayed but serious symptoms. Dr. Ito noted that even minor injuries could become fatal when combined with radiation exposure. His notebooks became a chronicle of human vulnerability, a record that would later be invaluable to understanding atomic warfare's consequences. Despite the invisible wounds, some resilience shone through. Survivors banded together, sharing water, food, and shelter. Children played cautiously in the ash-strewn streets, their laughter a fragile defiance. Dr. Ito saw that even amid devastation, life clung stubbornly to Hiroshima. It was in these small moments, shared meals, whispered reassurances, tiny acts of kindness, that hope persisted. By the end of the part, Dr. Ito understood a crucial truth. The atomic bomb did not just destroy buildings, it shattered the human body and mind in ways that science was only beginning to comprehend. Its effects would echo for years, decades, and generations. Yet, amid despair, the human capacity for compassion and endurance remained unbroken, a quiet testament to the resilience of life itself. Weeks turned into months, and Dr. Ito's work in Hiroshima revealed a cruel truth: the battle was far from over. The atomic bomb had done its immediate work of destruction, but it left behind a city poisoned from within. The invisible enemy, the radiation, continued its relentless assault, affecting bodies and minds in ways he could not yet fully understand. People who had appeared to survive the initial blast now faced a slow and unpredictable decline. Dr. Ito visited a young woman, Yumi, whose family home had been obliterated. She had escaped the firestorm but developed persistent fevers and unexplained bleeding. Her once bright eyes were dull, and her body, once slender and strong, had begun to waste away. Dr. Ito held her hand and whispered encouragement, knowing that the medicine available to him could do little. He documented every symptom, every pattern, desperate to understand how to fight what he could not see. Children remained a special concern. Little Kenji, who had wandered the streets in shock, developed sores that refused to heal and a fatigue that left him unable to attend the makeshift schools. Mothers brought their children to Dr. Ito, pleading for relief from a torment that science could not yet answer. The doctor realized that survival now depended as much on nutrition, care, and shelter as it did on medical knowledge. Radiation did not discriminate. Survivors of all ages experienced hair loss, weakened immune systems, and delayed injuries that flared without warning. Families that had survived together were torn apart again as parents and siblings succumbed slowly, while others endured chronic illness. The city's cemeteries began to fill not only with those who died immediately, but with those who had survived the fire only to be claimed by the invisible wound. Dr. Ito also noticed psychological wounds deepening. Survivors who had escaped the blast now lived in constant fear of disease and death. Sleep was scarce, nightmares common. Some refused to leave their temporary shelters, haunted by visions of the sky splitting in fire. Children cried out for lost siblings, friends, and pets. Dr. Ito worked tirelessly to calm them, his voice trembling as he tried to hold together fragments of hope in a city that had none. Despite the suffering, life persisted. Communities formed to share resources, offering food, water, and blankets. Survivors scavenged what they could from the ruins, supporting those too weak to move. Dr. Ito observed acts of courage and kindness that seemed almost impossible in the shadow of such devastation: neighbors carrying the sick to safety, women teaching children in makeshift classrooms, and survivors helping one another through the pain of loss. Medical knowledge slowly advanced. Researchers and physicians began to understand patterns of radiation sickness, linking distance from the epicenter to the severity of symptoms. Dr. Ito recorded cases meticulously: how minor burns turned lethal, how infections ravaged the weakened, and how certain exposures could trigger long-term cancer. Each record was a warning for future generations and a testament to the resilience of those who clung to life. Amid the suffering, stories emerged that revealed both horror and courage. Taro, a young man who had lost his entire family, became a volunteer in the makeshift hospitals, assisting Dr. Ito in caring for children. Hannah, a nurse who had survived with only minor injuries, devoted herself to comforting the grieving and feeding the hungry, refusing to leave the city despite the dangers. These individuals became living symbols of endurance, showing that humanity could persist even in the face of unimaginable devastation. Dr. Ito also documented the long-term impact on fertility and pregnancy. Many women who had been pregnant during the blast miscarried or gave birth to children with severe deformities. The next generation would carry the invisible scars of Hiroshima, a reminder of the bomb's far-reaching consequences. Parents faced impossible grief, and doctors struggled to provide explanations for a phenomenon that science had never encountered before. As months turned into years, the city began to rebuild physically, but the psychological and biological scars lingered. Dr. Ito reflected on the resilience of his patients and the horror of their invisible wounds. He realized that the atomic bomb had not only leveled buildings but had rewritten the rules of human survival. Life in Hiroshima was a fragile balance between hope and despair, and every day was a victory over the lingering shadow of the bomb. By the end of this part, the audience is left with the chilling understanding that the bomb's effects did not end with the explosion. They continued silently, reshaping the lives, health, and futures of every survivor. Dr. Ito's work, his notebooks, and the courage of those who endured, became the first steps toward understanding the full human cost of atomic warfare, a cost measured not only in immediate destruction, but in years of suffering that followed. By the spring of 1946, the city of Hiroshima was still a skeleton of what it had been. Streets were littered with rubble, buildings reduced to jagged steel and crumbling concrete, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and smoke that lingered long after the fires had died. Yet amidst this ruin, life stubbornly fought its way forward. Survivors emerged from the shadows of the bomb, determined to reclaim fragments of their former lives. Dr. Ito walked among them daily, documenting the slow return of human activity. Farmers cleared fields of debris, hoping to coax crops from scarred earth. Children cautiously played in ruins, their laughter tentative but insistent. People rebuilt homes with salvaged wood and steel, crafting shelters that were fragile but vital. Each hammer strike, each brick laid, was an act of defiance against the destruction that had sought to erase them. Among these survivors was Michiko, a seamstress who had lost her husband and 2 children in the blast. She spent her days stitching clothes for neighbors, transforming scraps into garments that preserved both modesty and dignity. Her hands shook from malnutrition, yet her determination never wavered. Each stitch she completed was a testament to human resilience, a refusal to surrender to despair. Taro, the young man who had volunteered in the hospitals, now worked with makeshift rebuilding crews. Scarred by burns across his back and arms, he moved with careful determination, helping to clear debris and reconstruct shelters. He carried the invisible weight of grief, yet found purpose in helping others. When a beam threatened to collapse, he would intervene without hesitation, saving neighbors he did not know. His courage had evolved from survival to service. Education slowly resumed, though schools were mere remnants of their former selves. Teachers salvaged materials, writing lessons on boards set up in half-collapsed buildings or even in open courtyards. Children, many of whom had witnessed horrors they could barely comprehend, began learning letters and numbers again. Yet the classroom walls could not contain the trauma. Some students cried at the sound of sirens, others recoiled at sudden movements. Dr. Ito worked with psychologists and volunteers to help them regain a sense of safety and normalcy. The psychological scars were profound. Survivors suffered from what Dr. Ito would later describe as silent panic, sudden anxiety triggered by shadows, fire, or noise. Families struggled to reconnect after losing so many members, and entire neighborhoods were haunted by ghosts of the past. Yet amidst this, small acts of hope began to multiply. Families planted gardens, organized communal meals, and shared stories of resilience, creating a fragile but vital web of human connection. Medical challenges persisted. Radiation effects continued to appear, sometimes months or years after exposure. Dr. Ito observed delayed cancers, chronic anemia, and unexplained illnesses that baffled even the most experienced doctors. He tirelessly recorded these cases, aware that the knowledge he gathered would inform future generations. Every patient, every symptom, became a lesson in the invisible toll of nuclear warfare. One striking story was that of Haruto, a boy of 8 who had survived the blast with only minor injuries. Yet his parents were lost, and he wandered the city alone for weeks. Dr. Ito found him near the river, clutching a tattered toy and refusing to leave the ruined city. Eventually, he was placed with relatives, but the emotional trauma remained. Haruto's slow adaptation to his new life mirrored the city's own struggle, fractured, scarred, but determined to endure. Artists and writers began documenting the city's story. Painters captured scenes of ruins, portraits of survivors, and the haunting glow of the firestorm. Writers recorded personal accounts, combining memory and observation into narratives that would preserve the human dimension of Hiroshima's tragedy. These creative endeavors became both therapy and testimony, providing a voice to those who had witnessed the unimaginable. By late 1946, Hiroshima's population was slowly rising again. Markets reopened, though sparsely stocked, and transportation resumed on a limited scale. Survivors shared food, medicine, and knowledge, relying on community solidarity to compensate for the city's shattered infrastructure. The first seeds of a permanent recovery were sown, not in grand gestures, but in countless small acts of human perseverance. Dr. Ito reflected on these developments in his notes. The atomic bomb had destroyed a city and altered the course of countless lives, but it had not destroyed the human spirit. Each rebuilt home, each child returning to school, each volunteer risking exposure to care for the sick, became a symbol of resistance against annihilation. Hiroshima's survivors had been forced to confront death, loss, and uncertainty, yet they had chosen life, community, and hope over despair. By the end of this chapter, viewers are left with a dual sense of horror and admiration. The bomb's immediate devastation is clear, but so too is humanity's capacity to endure, to rebuild, and to hope against overwhelming odds. Hiroshima becomes a story not only of destruction but of rebirth, where the courage of the living writes a counter-narrative to the horrors they endured. August 6, 1945, began like any other summer morning in Hiroshima, but by 8:15 a.m., the world had changed forever. The flash of the atomic bomb erased entire neighborhoods in an instant, and the city's skyline disappeared into smoke and fire. Yet the story of Hiroshima did not end in those moments of destruction. It echoed across generations, across oceans, and into the very conscience of humanity. Dr. Ito, who had witnessed the bomb's immediate horrors and a slow, painful recovery, often reflected on what Hiroshima meant for the world. He understood that the city was both a warning and a mirror. A warning of what mankind could unleash with technology untethered from morality, and a mirror of human resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of life in the face of annihilation. Survivors carried Hiroshima in their bodies, their memories, and their spirits. Radiation sickness, burns, and injuries were visible reminders, but invisible scars ran deeper. Survivors, hibakusha, faced social stigma, employment discrimination, and the weight of being living witnesses to a horror that many could barely comprehend. Yet, in sharing their stories, they transformed personal suffering into a universal lesson. Their voices demanded that the world remember, reflect, and, perhaps, restrain itself from repeating the same mistakes. Hiroshima became the focal point of global awareness about nuclear weapons. In the rubble and ash, memorials rose, the Genbaku Dome, preserved in skeletal form, standing as a testament to both devastation and survival. Schools incorporated the history into their curricula. Students visited the Peace Memorial Park, touching names etched into stone, and learning that war's cost is measured not just in strategy or territory, but in human lives forever altered. The city's rebirth became symbolic. New neighborhoods rose from the ruins, green parks replaced scorched fields, and families returned to their lives with a cautious hope. Yet Hiroshima never forgot. Annually, on August 6th, voices across generations read the names of those lost, and citizens release lanterns on the river to illuminate the dark water, a reminder that light can follow darkness, but memory must never fade. On a broader scale, Hiroshima's legacy challenged the global imagination. Scientists, politicians, and citizens around the world confronted the terrifying potential of atomic weapons. Treaties, disarmament discussions, and public protests were fueled by the haunting image of a city reduced to ash in minutes. The tragedy of Hiroshima transformed abstract numbers on military reports into human faces, children, and families, reminding humanity that war's consequences cannot be fully calculated in strategy alone. For Dr. Ito, the most profound legacy was human empathy. His years documenting the suffering, the recovery, and the resilience of survivors revealed a truth more enduring than any political debate: human beings are capable of extraordinary endurance, creativity, and compassion, even after witnessing unimaginable cruelty. Each life rebuilt, each school reopened, each garden replanted was a triumph over the forces that sought to erase existence itself. Artists, poets, and writers carried Hiroshima into the cultural memory of the world. Poems, paintings, and novels depicted the horror and resilience, ensuring that Hiroshima became not just a historical event, but a moral parable. From Yoko's delicate sketches of children playing in the shadows of ruins to the somber writings of survivors describing the flash that became a shadow of death, art became both memorial and lesson. Yet, the legacy of Hiroshima is not only backward-looking. It lives in every dialogue about ethics in science, in nuclear policy, and in global responsibility. The city's survivors became activists, speaking to the United Nations, sharing their experiences, and demanding that the horror they endured not be repeated. Their courage transformed tragedy into advocacy, grief into action, and suffering into wisdom. Dr. Ito often closed his diaries with a simple observation: Hiroshima will never be forgotten, not because it was destroyed, but because we chose to rebuild with eyes wide open. The city is our warning, our hope, and our testament that life, though fragile, can endure even the unthinkable. As viewers reflect on Hiroshima, they confront the duality of human nature, the capacity for destruction, and the equal capacity for compassion, resilience, and remembrance. The city, scarred yet reborn, tells a story that is simultaneously a warning, a memorial, and a celebration of the human spirit. Hiroshima is no longer merely a place, it is a global conscience, echoing across time, demanding memory, reflection, and vigilance.